My name is Lance Ackerman. I'm with Colorado Springs Utilities, and tonight we will be, this webinar is on smart watering practices for Colorado Springs. But before we get into that, I kind of like to set the stage of why we're discussing this topic of smart watering practices for Colorado Springs. And it's because we live in a semi-arid climate. This area is a natural low grass prairie, so this picture here is typically what you could expect for a low grass prairie. So a lot of the landscapes that we have here, the trees, those things are kind of a manufactured environment that we've created to have a vibrant community and enjoy the place that we live. Our local climate dictates for those manufactured landscapes that we might have to add some supplemental irrigation. So with that supplemental irrigation, it's important to be efficient and smart with those watering practices. So as on historical annual precipitation is roughly less than 16 inches, between 16 and 11 inches during the growing season. So one of the better benefits of this natural precipitation is we do get a good portion of that during our growing season of April through October timeframe. With that said, Kentucky bluegrass, which is the predominant lawn type here in Colorado Springs on the Front Range, requires about 40 inches of precipitation or 40 inches of water to really thrive. That means that we need to supplement that species of grass with roughly 24 to 30 inches of water throughout the growing season, which equates to about 3 times per week. And we'll talk about number of times per week that you should expect to irrigate as we progress through our growing season. So just to set the stage a little bit of why it is important for these smart watering practices. So the agenda tonight, we're going to talk about the benefits of the sprinkler system. We'll talk a little bit about management of the sprinkler system, sprinkle application methods, how you can determine how you apply the correct amount of water, some methods to apply that correct amount of water, pairing those different application methods with the landscape that you have, and then we'll talk a little bit about efficient sprinkler equipment. So these items here kind of all go hand in hand to create our smart watering practices. So the benefits of a sprinkler system, those really are, it's going to provide better plant and landscape health. It's going to apply that water in a more precise fashion. It's certainly a lot more efficient than moving that hose along. You might overwater a certain area, underwater another area because it's not getting the correct amount of water. A lot of times with a hose watering system, you might forget about it for an extended period of time, so you could see runoff occurring. So the benefits of an automatic sprinkler system, it really is, it's more precise, it's more efficient, which in the long run equates to better plant and landscape health. And with that better plant and landscape health, it's going to be more tolerant to heat, drought, and all of our factors that we have here in our climate that make it really difficult for plants to survive. It's also going to increase that property value of your home. But one of the biggest things in my mind that I really enjoy about a sprinkler system is it really frees your time. So you can see this wonderful family here we have here. It's going to free their time to go ahead and go to the kiddos' soccer game, go on a vacation. It allows them to frees up their weekend time. So it really does provide a great benefit in that sense as well. So now we're going to discuss the management of a sprinkler system. So how all of these play hand in hand. If you understand some of the knowledge of the main components of that sprinkler system, it's really going to help you manage your sprinkler system much better. And with management of a sprinkler system comes efficiency, and you can really gain and improve upon those smart watering practices. So this picture here is what we're looking at is a backflow device. That's one of the main components. That's kind of the beginning of your irrigation system. So this is what you typically find on a residential system, is you have this point here that's coming either out of a crawl space or out of a utility closet, perhaps a garage. That's coming out of the garage, that's your water supply, and it goes through this backflow device. So this backflow device is here. That's what's preventing any water that's in your irrigation system from coming back into your home and into your drinking water supply. So this is kind of the main component. This is where the irrigation system starts. These two blue handles here, what we call those, are ball valves. So those will be manipulated to either shut water off, turn water on. A lot of times those will be altered for a winterization for your sprinkler system once we hit a freezing point. So from there it goes down into your valve box. And in your valve box you have a valve manifold. So you have each one of these ports that is connecting to a control valve, which goes into a zone of your irrigation system. So just kind of understanding some of the terminology, what you're looking at, starting where you start out with your irrigation system. Here's all these wires that are into this component here that ultimately go back to your controller, which is kind of the electrical component of the irrigation system that signals for when things to turn on and turn off. It's kind of a fancy timer in a sense. So, you know, those timers that you have for the holiday season, where you might signal your holiday lights to come on at a certain time and turn off at another time. It's really similar to this sprinkler controller that does the same kind of thing. Another thing is, it's really important to observe your irrigation system function. As a typical or as a recommended smart watering practices, a lot of times irrigation systems are running either early in the morning or late at night when you may not be out there. So it's important to occasionally turn that irrigation system on during the daytime, and just go ahead and observe and see what's going on. We have a leak here in this picture that's occurring. So the longer that leak goes undetected, you're going to waste a lot of water, and then your landscape starts to show that signs of stress. So in this area, it's a lawn area. So since this sprinkler head is not functioning properly, that landscape is going to start to brown out, or the grass will start to show signs of stress. And it's really important to get to the root cause of that, and you can do that by observing it in operation during the daytime. So that kind of leads to the more frequent interactions. So the more you interact with your irrigation system, the more you kind of just know about that irrigation system, how it's functioning, if there are leaks are occurring, if something's out of the norm. So it's important the more frequently you interact with it, you can find these leaks that are occurring. And then the next question becomes is this something that you feel comfortable doing yourself with that knowledge of those system components, or is it something that should be hired out for professional work? So if it's this backflow device here, and you got a leak or something's occurring with that backflow device, perhaps that's an opportunity or a time where you may feel more comfortable to hire a professional to do that work. The benefit of knowing these components is, as you call that company out to perform this work, you can tell them, hey, I've got something going on with my backflow. So it kind of eliminates some of their troubleshooting and allows them to get that work done at a quicker pace. And then again, you know, those leaks occur all the time, especially these ones right next to a driveway or a curb or a sidewalk. Those are really prone to damage, so be sure to check those for leaks. This leak here is, my wife is notorious, or even myself, I'm notorious for cutting that corner a little close on the driveway and might damage that sprinkler. And the longer it goes, the more water that's wasted. You can see just how much water is pooling in this curb pan here that's just ultimately wasted. Again, just another leak. So this is a leak of a broken head or a missing nozzle. And as you hear me talk about this terminology, we do have a recorded webinar just on getting to know your irrigation system. So really go into all the terminology, what what a head is versus what's a nozzle. So I really recommend taking a look at that. It's a recorded webinar. You can watch that on your free time or your own time and really dive into the details of the irrigation system. So next we're going to move into the sprinkler application methods. And there's really three main types, and those are overhead, point source drip, and inline drip. So overhead is the traditional sprinklers that throw water into the air. And then the last two are just different types of drip irrigation. Point source drip is really that drip irrigation that's going directly to a specific plant, whereas inline drip, you'll typically see that laid in a grid type structure of some manner to really irrigate a large area. So then you really want to pair these sprinkler application methods with what type of landscape you desire to apply that water to. So for a lawn, typically you want to apply overhead irrigation because you're wetting that entire area of that lawn. And then we'll talk a little bit about different types of overhead. So there's a few different types of overhead irrigation. This picture you see here is a pop-up or fixed sprinkler. And then here is a rotor sprinkler. So these rotor sprinklers are kind of like a turret style. They pop up and they kind of sweep back and forth in a pattern. So whether it's a 180-degree pattern, maybe it's in a corner, so it's only going a quarter of a circle, or a 90-degree pattern because this is wetting that area. So that's a rotor sprinkler. And then finally, we have a multi-stream rotary nozzle. So that's still a pop-up head, but in this case, we've we've transitioned that fixed spray nozzle to a multi-stream rotary nozzle. So these multi-stream rotary nozzles are just much more efficient than the traditional fixed spray heads. Tree and shrubs, those are really that point source drip where you're really going to apply that water directly to the root or that drip line of the tree. Dense perennials, you might want to think about utilizing the inline drip sprinkle application method, just because that's going to be an area that is covering a lot of ground. So in this picture here, we have a variety of perennials, shrubs, ornamental grasses, and this whole surface area is eventually going to be covered with these perennials in this plant life. So it's important to start to think about these things as you take a look at your landscape. For this situation, you might use inline drip just because some of these plants are going to be much taller than an overhead sprinkler. So you don't, as these plants mature, you don't want those plants to block the spray pattern of those sprinkler heads. There is an opportunity to go ahead and use overhead irrigation for a dense perennial planting bed, but you want to upgrade those irrigation heads to a much taller 12-inch irrigation head that's going to allow that sprinkler head to pop up above that plant foliage and go ahead and irrigate that area efficiently. Vegetable gardens, a really great option is inline drip. So those can be irrigated really efficient for that vegetable garden. Inline drip is this brown piping that you see here that is manufactured with emitters inside of that pipeline, so that the inline drip comes pre-manufactured with the emitters, as opposed to the point source where you're going to poke that specific emitter into that irrigation line. So here's an example of an opportunity to go ahead and upgrade a sprinkler head to a larger size to irrigate a densely planted perennial bed with overhead irrigation. And I would highly recommend, if you're going to go that route, to use the high efficient rotary nozzle to irrigate that area. So now we're really going to move to how do you determine how to apply the correct amount of water. And there's various methods to do this, and we'll go through all the methods And we'll also talk about a step you can take to apply that correct amount of water in a more efficient fashion. So one of the first steps is just strictly watering according to the season. This graph up here is just based upon historical weather patterns. So it's just just a kind of a guideline to start with. So typically in April, you may water 1 time per week, depending on the weather. If it's a cool start to the spring, you may not water at all in April. This spring in April, we only received 1/100th of an inch for the entire month of April. So that would have been a year where it might have been really good to water just that 1 time per week to give that lawn and those plants just a little drink of water each week. Then as you progress through the season, you increase the number of weekly watering days. So in May, it's typically recommended to water 2 days per week, and then you ramp up in the heat of the summer, June, July, and August, to that 3 days per week, and then kind of bring it back down as we go into the fall with 2 days per week, watering days in September, and then that 1 day per week in October. And again, this is just a guideline, so it's something to go ahead and start to curtail that usage and make sure that you are efficiently watering your landscape. The idea is each weekly watering day is to apply about a 1/2 inch of water. We'll discuss how you start to dive into how do you determine that you're applying that 1/2 inch of water. And then we'll talk a little bit about cycle and soaking those overhead sprinkler zones once you've determined how long it takes to apply that 1/2 inch of water. So going back to our different types of overhead sprinklers and their nozzle types, that will really give you a guideline, general rule of thumb of how long you should water for with each one of these irrigation types to apply that 1/2 inch of water each day. For a fixed spray head, which just pops up and has a fixed pattern, it's continuous water and a fan, it takes roughly 20 minutes to apply the targeted 1/2 inch of water. For rotor heads, it's roughly 45 minutes, so those heads that pop up and they kind of sweep back and forth like a turret in a turret style, it's roughly 45 minutes to apply that 1/2 inch of water. And then finally, the multi-stream rotary nozzle takes about 60 minutes to apply a 1/2 inch of water. So really what we're looking at here is different precipitation rates. So one of the things I like to envision is the analogy of how much water comes out of a garden hose versus how much water comes out of a fire hose. So that fire hose is going to be your fixed spray heads. It's going to have a lot of water coming out in a short period of time. So that's why it only takes roughly 20 minutes to apply that 1/2 inch of water. Then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the multi-stream rotary nozzle, which is that high efficiency. It has larger water droplets. They're less susceptible to wind drift. And as we all know, we've had plenty of wind here lately. So these could be a good upgrade to consider. But that multi-stream rotary nozzle is that garden hose where it's just going to take a lot longer, a little bit less water coming out of that garden hose than that fire hose. So it's the same amount of water. It's just the different types of flow rate or precipitation rates for these different types of sprinkler heads. So that's one way to go ahead and start to dial in how long it takes to apply that 1/2 inch of water. So you would not want to water a fixed spray head for 40 minutes because that would be applying roughly 1 inch of water. And with our local soils here, there's a good chance that the majority of that 1 inch of that water is not going to be beneficially used in the soil. It'll either flush through the rooting zone of the lawn, or it will run off and be wasted. And then the multi-stream rotary nozzle just applies that water a lot slower, allows that water to percolate and soak into the soil over a period of time. Another method you could take is just take some sort of container. We got a Tupperware here. We've taken a tape measure measured a 1/2 inch on that tape measure. We set it in the lawn, and then you turn your sprinklers on and just time how long it takes to reach that 1/2 inch of water. My recommendation would to get a handful of these and put it throughout the entire area. But you want to make sure that you're using the same container over and over. So one of the things I like to use is a tuna can. They're all the same size, about a 1/2 inch in that tuna can. I just time how long it takes to apply that 1/2 inch of water with my irrigation system or with my sprinkler system. Once you've determined how long it takes to apply that 1/2 inch of water, there is a method that we can implement that makes most beneficial use of the water that's being applied. It's great to prevent runoff, and it gets that water to soak into the ground. So again, it's making the most beneficial use of the water that we're applying. So I have an example here that we can run through, and we're just going to go with our general guideline. We're going to do it for a fixed spray head. We're going to go with our general guideline of about 20 minutes for a 1/2 inch of water. One trick of the trade is most irrigation systems, you can have multiple programs that tell it to turn on, and then you can have another program that will tell another program to turn on. So you would want to implement your controller and program it correctly, but the concept here is to water and then wait a period of time, come back and water again, and wait a period of time, and then finish out that watering. So one of the things I like to do is right off the bat, as I like to save 10% of the water just for that zone or for that area, and I reduce it to 18 minutes because we're really making most beneficial use of this water at this point in time. So now we've reduced our total run time down to 18 minutes. From there, we're going to water for 6 minutes, and we're going to wait 30 to 60 minutes, so a 1/2 hour to an hour, and then we're going to come back and water that same zone or same area another 6 minutes. Then we'll wait another 30 to 60 minutes, allow that water to soak into the soil, and then we're going to come back and water and finish out for another 6 minutes for that total of 18 minutes. So that's the cycle and soak method, and I would recommend using it at all times. You might do only two cycles, so it might be beneficial to do a 9-minute run time and then wait and then another 9-minute run time. But how you can kind of determine that is if you water for 6 minutes and you start to see runoff on the sidewalk, you definitely don't want to push it to 9 minutes, because if you add another 3 minutes to that, all of that water is just going to run off and it's not being beneficially used. So I like to start with a 3-cycle method, but depending on soil type, slopes of your yard, you might be able to get away with just doing a 2-cycle method. So once you've determined that you're applying the correct amount of water, now it's really pairing that correct amount of water with the landscape or your plant type for that area or zone. So high water plants, that would be your lawn areas, that would be your high water using perennials, but mostly, for the most part, that's your lawn. That's your Kentucky bluegrass lawn, your tall fescue lawn. You're going to water that 1 to 3 times per week throughout the growing season. Again, it depends on the time of season. It doesn't make much sense to water 3 times per week in April because the plant really isn't using that much water at that point in time, and that amount of water isn't needed. So pairing the correct amount of water with your landscape type with watering according to season really sets you up for best success. Moderate water plants, that's where you're going to be watering those plants 1 to 2 times per week. So those are a lot of your Carl Forster grasses, your cool season ornamental grasses, plants like that that are really popular plant that you might find at a Home Depot or a Lowe's. Those could be a 1 to 2 week per week watering for those types of plants. Like a globe spruce is another one that I might recommend a 1 to 2 times per week for that plant. Low water plants, so those are your really xeric plants that you want to do 1 time per week. and pairing that with a correct application method really sets you up for best success. And then your very low water plants, so those are your true native plants. You might go, or your succulents, or if you have cactus, that might be that 1 to 2 times per month. So applying the correct amount of water and pairing it with your landscape can really set you up for best success here in Colorado Springs. From there, I want to talk just a little bit about our water-wise rules. So applying the correct amount of water, the number of times per week, and then pairing that with our water-wise rules. So we really have 6 rules that we have in effect currently, and those are: you can water up to 3 days per week. You choose the days. So with the things that we've learned tonight about watering according to the season, pairing that correct water amount with your landscape type, that 3 days per week rule is really intended for the heat of the summer. So I can't stress enough, it may not make much sense to be watering 3 days per week, April through October, just because the landscape really doesn't need it. From May 1st through October 15th, run your sprinklers before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. So again, going back to the beginning portion of this webinar, I talked about sprinklers typically run either late at night, late in the evening, early in the morning when you aren't out there to visually see them in operation. So it's important to water before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. As we progress throughout the day, those are typically the windier parts of the day. There's a lot more evaporation that can occur, so that's why we ask for that rule to go ahead and water from May 1st through October 15th, to go ahead and water prior to 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. Do not let water pool or flow across the ground. So that's, just checking on those sprinkler systems to make sure that you don't have a leak that's going on for days, a couple days, or it's just really wasting a large amount of water. A lot of these sprinklers are producing anywhere from 2 or 3 gallons per minute all the way up to 10 gallons per minute. So as you water those, as you're watering with your sprinkler system, if you have a leak, that can really add up really quick. Repair those leaking sprinkler systems within 10 days. So if you do have a leak, try to get those leaks repaired within 10 days. Use a shut-off nozzle when washing anything with a hose. So if you're out there washing your car, we just ask that if you let go of that hose, that it's going to turn off rather than it just continuing to spew out water. Clean hard surfaces such as driveways, sidewalks, and patios with water only if there's a public health or safety concern. So one of the examples I like to use is if you have a patio and there's, the Canadian geese come through, that might make sense to go ahead and wash that patio off with some water. Or if you're grilling and you spill a soda pop or something like that on the patio, it might make sense to wash that off just to keep the ants away. But for the most part, we recommend using a leaf blower or a broom or something like that to clean those sidewalks or patios or your driveway. Some exceptions to these water-wise rules. So drip irrigation, anytime, any day. So the water-wise rules, you can water with that drip irrigation anytime and any number of days. We do have another recorded webinar just all about drip irrigation, a number of times to water with drip irrigation, how to install drip irrigation components. So I'd recommend taking a look at that if you're really interested in drip irrigation. Hose watering with a positive shutoff nozzle. So if you're going to go out there with a watering wand and water things, you can do that at any time and any day. Watering with a watering can. So if you have just the watering can that you fill up and go to the plants around your property, you can do that anytime, any day. If you need to establish a new landscape, plants, grass, seed, we have an establishment permit that's free of charge. You just have to apply, and then you're able to water anytime and any number of days for a limited period. So for a sod installation or plants, it's 28 days or 4 weeks. And then for any seed projects, so whether you're installing new seed, native seed, or if it's an overseed project, you get 42 days as a an exception to these rules of the time of day and the number of days. You can apply for a water allocation plan, and what that does is you still have to follow the 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. and 10 a.m. rule, but it allows you to water any number of days, any day of the week, and it gives you a site-specific volume of water for your property. And that's just based upon that 24 to 30 inches that we saw that the Kentucky bluegrass uses. So all the square footage that's non-permeable or that's permeable area on your property gets a 24-inch volume of water. High-use sports fields, they can technically water any day, but they're not allowed technically to water during the middle of the day. For our non-potable water customers, any day, non-potable water customers have their own rules on time of day. But if they're establishing things, landscapes or grass areas, they'll need to still get an establishment permit. So the next thing I want to talk about is just what's going on this spring. What's going on with the lawns this spring. So as I've gone around town, I've just noticed a lot of our cool season grasses, a lot of people's lawns, they're just slow to come out of dormancy this year. They're not looking as vibrant green as they typically do at this time of year. So I know the alarm bells might be going off, but there's a few things that we can do to check on those lawns to see if that grass will survive. So one of the tests is just kind of, I call it like the hair pulling test. So just take your hand and pull up on that grass. If that grass kind of lifts up or pulls completely out of there, out of the soil, there's a good chance that that area or that lawn might need to be replaced. But if you pull up on it and it has a little bit of resistance to it and it feels like it's just not coming out of there super easy, I would recommend to go ahead and continue to water that grass, and it should come out of dormancy. The reason that we have this is just the fall. Last fall, it was kind of a warm fall. We had lack of moisture during last fall. Then as we progressed through the winter months, we were warm for the most part of the winter, not very much moisture throughout the winter. And then we've continued into the spring with the lack of moisture in April. I've talked about we had 1/100th of an inch of moisture in April, which is basically we had zero moisture in April. When we typically in Colorado, we will see a large portion of precipitation, whether it's snow or rain events during April. So just a lack of moisture in the spring here. And then we just continue to have these damaging, desiccating winds that are really taking a toll on all landscapes, grass and lawns included. It's taking a toll on some of our trees that we have throughout town. It's taking a toll on our perennials. So just all of these contributing factors to our climate here are really making a challenge this spring. One way to combat all of these challenges that we're facing is just really that consistent proper watering and lawn care techniques. So implementing some of the things we talked about tonight with that consistent proper watering, make sure you're applying that 1/2 inch of water. Make sure you're applying the correct amount of water. If you're not watering that 1/2 inch and you water really shallow, it really makes it susceptible to these variables in this climate that we're experiencing right now. And then the proper lawn care techniques. So make sure you're setting your mower at the highest setting. Don't mow that lawn super short. Make sure you're on a good lawn aeration and fertilizer schedule to allow that lawn to really thrive coming out of spring and going into fall. So make sure you're staying up on those lawn care techniques and the consistent proper watering. One thing is, that's why we have that time of day rules, is because as we progress through the day, that's typically the times where we're going to notice more wind And if you're watering during the middle of the day, that water is being carried by the wind, not being applied to the targeted area, so it's not a good beneficial use of that water. Then we'll talk about kind of wrapping it all up and how you can achieve some of this with some of the things that I would highly recommend as far as sprinkler equipment. So having a smart controller that can really take into account all these weather conditions, your plant type, your soil type. If you have a smart controller, it can really take some of the guesswork out of it for you. Utilizing that rain sensor, that way if we do receive any sort of precipitation, you're not irrigating or using your sprinklers on top of that rain event. Investing in pressure regulating sprinkler heads that are also, those are available for a rebate. So if you have a high pressure situation and you notice a lot of missing occurring, that could be an opportunity to upgrade that component. Sprinkler heads with check valves, I highly recommend upgrading to those sprinkler heads. So here on the right we have a picture that shows a sprinkler head that just looks like a lot of fogging and missing. That's an indicator that that pressure is too high. So that can be addressed with that pressure regulating sprinkler head. So here's another example of a irrigation head that has too high of a pressure. So pressure regulating heads can eliminate water waste due to that misting. So what typically happens is if you have high pressure and you have misting occurring, those water droplets are not being applied to the targeted area. The landscape will start to show signs of stress. And a lot of times the solution is to either add additional time or think that you might need to add another run day. And that's really not the root cause, and that root cause is that too high of a pressure. So being able to address that and solve that with that pressure regulating sprinkler head can be absolutely critical and super beneficial. Sprinkler heads with a check valve, so what those are is each time your irrigation system or your sprinklers turn on, it fills the underground pipes with water. And you have that cycle and soak occurring because you're implementing the smart watering practices. But each time that cycle and soak turns off, all of that water in that line will drain out of the lowest point or the lowest head if you do not have a sprinkler head with a check valve. If you do upgrade to a sprinkler head with a check valve, what it's going to do is it's going to keep all of that water in the pipe for the next time that irrigation system turns on. So those can be a huge water saver. Then we have the match precipitation nozzle. Those are the ones that apply water at a slower rate. They're going to apply the same amount of water throughout the area, whether it's watering in a 90-degree or a quarter circle pattern, or if it's watering in a 180-degree pattern or a half circle area. It's going to apply that same amount of water in each area that it's watering. So that really makes that water evenly applied to that targeted area, so you're getting the same amount of water throughout that zone. And then lastly, we'll talk about the winter watering. So anytime you have the opportunity to do some winter watering, it's going to be a great benefit to the lawns and trees, and especially during dry periods. I highly recommend it, days of over 40 degrees. And it's not something that you have to do every day, but maybe if it's once a month, once a week, if you have that opportunity, I would definitely take advantage of it. And the last thing is just don't forget to disconnect those hoses during the winter, because it can create some significant problems if you do forget that hose that's attached to that hose bib. So we'll talk, to close out, we have tons of sprinkler system resources. We have those irrigation rebates, so all those products like the sprinkler heads with the check valves, the match precipitation nozzles, the sprinkler heads with the pressure regulating device, rain sensors, smart controllers, those are all eligible for rebates. So definitely check out those rebates on our website at csu.org. We have recorded webinars that I would definitely recommend taking a look at. Like I mentioned a little bit tonight, we have a few that can be kind of tie all this in together. Getting to know your irrigation system, smart lawn watering practices. We have one on drip irrigation. We all, pairing all that in with all of that suite of recorded webinars can be really beneficial. We have the fact sheet. So here's a little WaterWise lawn watering schedule. So we take a look at that. Watering according to the season. It gives you the general rule of thumb for irrigation as far as fixed sprayer, rotors, or the multi-stream. Here's take a look at our snapshot for the landscape webinars. So just recently we've had the landscape design in action webinar, and we've also had the intro to WaterWise landscaping. Thank you guys for your time tonight, and we'll see you guys here at the Conservation Center. Come and visit us. We're here Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. The garden is open 24 hours, 7 days a week. So feel free to come up and enjoy the garden, and we hope to see you here.